Okay, so welcome everyone. Super excited you are all here. Welcome, welcome, welcome fellows, welcome friends. We are super excited you're here. My name is Monica Kang. I'm the program director of IgniteNextGen, also a founder of Innovators Box. And we're so excited you're here because we're up in treat for a really special conversation. I thought it'd be great if you want to take a moment and use the chat box to say hello. Where are you tuning in from? What are you looking forward to hearing? And take a moment to share, because I know we have a lot of folks joining us both live on Facebook right now, as well as those who are joining here on Zoom. So if you can put in the chat box, where are you tuning in from? What are some things you're looking forward to? And we're really excited to see you. And maybe we can go ahead and also check in with some of our speakers before we officially start. Jeannie, I know since you've been part of the program for a while, like what's one thing you're looking forward to that we share today?
I always love sharing this portion of my journey because it's a huge part of just who I am today. Why I chose to pivot my entire, I guess, 30 years of what I thought I was going to do. And I want to make it clear I never planned on doing what I'm doing, but I know what I'm doing now is what I'm meant to do. So I hope that comes across. Yeah.
And we're going to be talking very much more on that. I want to check in with Eunice. I know there's a lot of meaning behind the program that we put together. Why is it important for you that we're doing this program and particularly this session live with everyone today?
Well, this program is really important because we learn from the wisdom of people who have gone before us. And we have some phenomenal speakers here today who are here to speak truthfully and vulnerably about their journey. And every time, whether I know these people, I've heard them before, or if they're new, there's always something to gain from them. And it changes our lives just a little bit. There's a shift in growth. And I think that is really something that you can't get easily because access to these types of people is limited, right? So I think it is just tremendous that we have such amazing people that are dedicated and willing to share their journey and their wisdom and insights and learn from you all as well. So it's a mutual thing and we're very grateful to have this opportunity.
Love it, Eunice. Thank you for sharing that. And it really sets the tone. I believe we also have Abe Kim here. Abe, would you like to share any highlights so that we get started on this exciting conversation? What is one thing you hope that the students get out of this conversation today?
Great to have all of you. It's a little bit windy where I am, so if it's a little bit windy, I apologize. But I think one great thing about life is that it's not linear, right? We have plans and we want to go somewhere, but life has a funny thing to throw you a couple of curveballs and take you in uncharted territories. And I think, and sometimes it's not the traditional way. And so I think the lives of our speaker today will share some of that. And I'm sure that there are many areas that Korean Americans, we need better representation and leaders in those areas. And these leaders are certainly a representative of some of those folks who are changing the world and making an impact in their sectors. But they got to where they got to, not in a straight path, but probably in a windy path. So I'm looking forward to their talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe, for sharing that. And if you can hear me, can you give a little virtual clap so that I know that you are here? We are very excited to have you all. Yes, the virtual claps are little emoji reactions. We have people all over the place: LA, Illinois, Virginia, New Jersey, California, Spain, DC, Atlanta, Virginia. I'm in DC. Yes, clapping. Thank you. Always helpful. So with that being said, let me tone down my music because we have so much to cover and it will be amiss if we do not get a chance to dive right in. So again, for those who don't know me, my name is Monica Kang. I'm currently in DC. I am super excited to partner with IgniteNextGen program with the two counterparts, Council of Korean American and also Korean American Coalition in LA, to build this unique experience for our next generation of leaders. They are currently going through a 6-week program, but we have these selective summer series where we invite all of you because these conversations are so good that we wanted to open up the door to talk with all of you and celebrating the diverse voices of what it means to be Korean American and just, traveling the untraveled path. So as the three have already kind of highlighted briefly, we have a lot that we're going to cover in really raising the question of what does it mean to, be a better problem solver, be a better communicator. And for those who are here in the last session, we had Dr. Han speak about, what it means to be thinking about our Korean American identity in literature. But let's continue to build on that. You're in for a treat. We have 4 amazing leaders who happen to have taken very different paths to where they are. And to kind of kick us started, instead of me just reading their traditional bio, I've asked them if they can take a moment to share. I know you've already read some of their information online, but if each speaker could briefly share, who you are, where you are, but most importantly, why did you care about the industry you're in? Because that in itself is a whole conversation. And we'll love if we can have Tad first and hear how that story went.
Well, good morning. How you guys all doing? I see all bright smiles already. It's a little early for me. I don't usually get up this early, but I'm up for you. So here we go. All right. So let's have fun. Make it exciting. And I'm in the sports industry. And because I have 5 older sisters, I carry a pink ball in my office. So there you go. This is how I inspire myself to think every day. Anyway, I've been in the sports industry for about 10 years now. I work for a very famous sports agent by the name of Boras. But I've definitely not had a linear career path. I've done just about everything from technology to customer service to now dealing with multi-millionaire baseball athletes. So it's been a fun journey, but it's been a very difficult journey at times. And that's why I think today's session will be very good for all of you to hear. Because when I was in your shoes many years ago, I won't say exactly how many years, but many years ago, I remember I wish I had something like this for myself. So that's the reason I'm doing this, because I want you guys to have a small head start. Not a big one, just a small head start. And I want to share with you the experiences that I've had that could help you kind of avoid the pitfalls and get over some anxieties that you may be feeling, especially in this time of the pandemic, and feel very hopeful that life in front of you is going to be very, very exciting. And I wish I could turn back the hands of time and be in your shoes right now. So feel excited about your life. I know that's tough to do that right now, but we can still get haircuts. My wife gave me a haircut yesterday, so anything's possible. Trust me. If my wife can give me a haircut, anything's possible. So with that said, yes, I'm in the sports and entertainment industry now, and I just started my own agency, but I'm still working at Boras Corporation. I think you guys kind of did your research on that. So I look forward to sharing my story with you guys today.
Geez, I have to follow that. Yeah, I got my hair done too, if anybody knows the color, but I got it professionally done. So I'm Jeannie Chang. I'm calling in from Raleigh. The term never say never? Well, I said that my whole life, like I'm never going to do this, I'm never do that. Well, guess what? Everything I said never to, I'm doing. So I would just say, maybe we rephrase that because so many things happen in life. Oh, thanks, Ina. She loves I get distracted by the chat. She loved my ombre coloring. I started out as a broadcast journalist covering President Clinton. That was an exciting, exciting career. Very stressful. Then I went to get my marketing degree, business school, went into marketing and PR. So I have a business background, and then I went into mental health. But let me tell you something, as I love how Abe said, it is a circular journey. I want to say everything that I did in my life to date, I am using those skills. My parents may not think so. No, I think they are now. But I think one of the things I want to get across is I was always trying to meet the expectations of my Korean American parents or my first generation Korean parents and my extended family. Very understandable, that's in our culture. So everything was toward them. And then I want to say later in my life, so I'm going to date myself, but early 30s, so I'm older than early 30s, I decided with my own kids, I have 4 kids, I'm going to do what I was passionate about. So which is why I am in mental health. And I'm very passionate about your generation, mainly because I have 2 of them in my house and 2 upcoming. So there's a lot that I want to share. I do not. So unlike Tad, I don't want to go back to college. No, I'm kidding. I loved college life, but I think I was also very lost. So I hope that we can provide to help you navigate. I agree with Tad. I did not have this. I'm reliving my youth through you guys. So if you think I'm trying to act young, it's because I want to. And I also have kids, so I also have to keep up with them, right? So I'm super excited to be here and share more about my journey.
Good morning from West Coast. This is Stefan So. I'm glad to see a lot of people from LA. So West Coast is best coast. Happy to see everyone here. And in terms of my background, I think I pretty much had a traditional, almost the Korean mentality, join big firms and get all the degrees as much as possible type of pathway. And I think Abe said life's not linear, and I think I've also been in that pathway. But I thought it's important to kind of give a quick background in terms of what I did. When I was in college and when I was graduating, we were going through a financial crisis. So similar to what you guys are going through now in terms of the job market. I mean, everything looks very tough. You really have to stand out. And I'm glad to give shout outs to some people that already sent LinkedIn requests because I think back in the day during the financial crisis, I must have sent 500 plus LinkedIn requests to a bunch of professionals, and actually that's how I got my first job at Deloitte. So Deloitte, for some of you that know, it's a large international accounting firm. Got my CPA, but I was on the audit side, and I always joke, audit, although it's good experience, it's more boring than watching paint dry. So I had to get out of there. And I joined a big, large bank. That was JP Morgan's private bank. That was a whole different experience in itself. I actually did an internship at Merrill Lynch, getting not paid, so that was painful. But I really advise everyone to get internship as much experience as possible, so you know what you like versus what you don't like. And that was an interesting experience because the vast majority of the clients have $10+ million in just investable assets, which was a whole different world to me. But that actually, combining those experiences led me to where I am now. I'm at a financial firm in predominantly the LA area. And now I'm working with very cool people that I always dreamed of working with, from movie directors to athletes to people that own 10,000 plus apartment units in LA. So it's been a phenomenal journey, and like everyone has mentioned, that I wish there were more programs like this when I was going through the process early in my career. So I'm glad everyone is participating.
Thank you so much for all sharing that. If we can give a round of applause to the first three speakers and how they're sharing. Connie's our first speaker. We're going to have a quick video of her share. But before that, I want to just highlight a couple themes that has already emerged that I hope you caught. All of them have shared that, there was something that they were initially interested, but then they had to quote, quote, pivot or explore different things, had to really think about their strengths and weakness. And that kind of reflects even why I'm personally excited about this conversation, because it's a similar story for me. For those who know my personal journey, I worked in nuclear weapons security, was in politics and government, and now doing innovation. And as many of them shared, it wasn't really as clear of a path, like I had to pave ways. And so as you're thinking about this, I want you to keep thinking about what is resonating with you, what questions are coming to mind, and engage with us in the chat box or Facebook Live. And with that, let's pull out also Connie's introduction. She's going to join us a little bit later, but you want to totally hear her story as well. So if we can have Connie's video, please.
Hi, I'm Connie Chung, and I'm the Executive Director of Korean American Family Services, or KFAM. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to empower Korean American and Asian Pacific Islander families through culturally responsive services. And we're located in Koreatown in Los Angeles, California. And I have been the Executive Director there for 11 years now. Prior to that, I was I was a public interest attorney, and I've been working altogether in the nonprofit field for about close to 20 years. But I started out doing litigation in the area of impact litigation and civil rights, and did that for about 6 or 7 years before really feeling the desire to return to my roots working in the Korean community and coming over to KFAM. And now, as opposed to doing legal services, we really focus more on direct services to support Korean immigrant families, particularly when they're in crisis or they're in need. So we really do a lot of work around mental health, domestic violence, child welfare or child abuse, and education and wellness opportunities for Korean adults and children. So the reason I came to KFAM and the reason I care about working in the nonprofit field is because when I was in college, I really felt this desire to work in the area of social justice or civil rights or really giving back. So when I went to law school, I knew full well that I would not become a corporate lawyer, that I would not go into a firm. I wanted to get a law degree as a tool for advocacy and promoting the needs of either international human rights or local civil rights. Now, when I came to KFAM, what I really learned was that it was one thing to work in mainstream nonprofits and to try to make the world a better place, but because of the cultural barriers and language barriers that we have in the Asian Pacific Islander community, especially in the Korean community, there was no way Korean clients were going to come to the mainstream organizations I was working at. It didn't matter how much outreach I did, it didn't how much media interviews I did. It didn't matter if we had staff who spoke Korean there or not. I realized that Koreans had a really hard time seeking these kinds of services and talking about these kinds of issues in an environment that was not Korean or at least Asian specific. In a way, I think I've traveled the road less traveled in that, you know, I didn't go corporate. I ended up working my whole life in nonprofit. I think for some Koreans that seemed a little bit eyebrow raising. You know, I went to Georgetown for law school, and I think people thought I had the opportunity to go into big firms and make a lot of money. And it was never my desire to do that. And I have to say, I am really blessed that I both, my family's financial means allowed me to make these kinds of choices, which I know is not true for other people. And I also had the support of my family who didn't have that expectation on me that I had to support them or my parents afterwards. And again, that's not a luxury that everyone has. But in my case, I had that luxury. And I thought, when people thought, oh, what a waste that, you know, Connie's not going into a big law firm and, you know, taking this really high status job, I didn't see it that way at all. And fortunately, my family didn't see it that way at all. I feel truly honored and blessed to be the executive director at KFAM and to be working directly with Korean communities. And I know when KFAM does new services and programs, when we're really reaching the community, we are doing things that no one else is able to do for our Korean immigrant community and our Korean American family.
If we can
And
get
so I
help
feel really
from
proud
the
of that and don't feel that
from the team. Thank you. Awesome. I want to make sure we have time when she joins us live, but I hope that that gave a glimpse into her story as well. There's so much richness into it, but the key is that you're seeing the commonality. None of these individuals, including myself, we took the road that was given. And that's the reason why we wanted to have this conversation, because that's kind of, frankly, the norm. So the first, big question that I have, they've already kind of answered, which is how they got into where they are. But I want to dig a little bit deeper, going back to our theme of problem solving and communication. I would love to maybe start with Tad, thinking about, tell us a little bit more in your specific industry, having now been to those different spaces of now in entertainment and also your sports. What's a skill that you would say that has come to be so important that now that you're in the industry, you recognize it's an important skill?
Wow, what a tough question to begin with. But if I were to say very simply, and actually, I'm looking at Casey Ryu right there. And she did exactly what you guys should be doing going forward. For example, in this business and any business for that matter, networking is going to be a part of your life. So if you develop that skill now, you'll be able to use it for the rest of your life. And networking doesn't mean just reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn. It means talking to somebody on the phone, having lunch with them, coffee with them, whatever your desire is in terms of the personalization. But networking is a fact of life. And the quicker you master it, the more successful you'll be in life, in whatever profession you choose to pursue. It just happens that in sports and entertainment, there's a very small niche of people. So if you do one thing wrong, everybody hears about it. If you do something right, everybody hears about it. So with that said, always be mindful of how you're acting, what you're doing, and be true to yourself, obviously, but be sure that you're doing everything in an ethical manner, and that your LinkedIn page never has to be deleted because you did something wrong. Hope that makes sense.
That last comment, LinkedIn page being deleted. I mean, that's something going back to, I mean, Stefan, your comment about how, just reaching out to people, and, Tad, you kind of already alluded to that intentionality. I would love to tie this, Stefan, from where you see, which is you're now on top of not only building those relationships, but needing to maintain. I mean, Tad, you do, everyone do as well. But Stefan, could you share a little bit more? Because you're also navigating that also in different types of tiers. You also serve the community where, financial literacy, but you're also working with a very wealthy, which is a very different community. Like, how would you say navigating those different stakeholders require you different skill sets, and also especially when you do problem solving?
Yeah, and absolutely. Actually, to Tad's point, he mentioned the importance of networking, and I would couple that with also really having the ability to connect with people. I mean, you could be the smartest person in the world, but again, if you don't network, and then secondly, if you don't connect with someone on some sort of a personal level, it's really hard to get to places, right? So I would say those two important skill sets are important for all groups of people. When it comes to financial literacy, one of my clients, they have a charter school and they're pouring in quite a bit of money to support low-income households up in the San Francisco area. So for that group, it's really connecting with them. When I was young, when I got so happy when I got the Carl's Jr. or Jack in the Box coupons, and I used that to save a few bucks here and there. And when I told that sort of a joke to a vast majority of the student population, they found that funny, and they're like, "Oh, I save coupons too, and that's how I save some money, and I know I could buy another burger." So that was for one subsect of the financial group, right? And for the wealthy, I mean, you have whole separate conversations. I mean, some people want to buy a yacht, and it's just the yacht, believe it or not, that's, you waste so much money on that, people don't really realize. And so just guiding through people in terms of what responsible financial plan means. So, again, to your point, the conversation's pretty vast, but having the ability to connect with people. One thing I will say, as I was going through the process, I always connected people in sports. I mean, I follow everything from baseball when I was young to basketball, all of that. So that was always my way in of connecting with, very established professionals. And then once I heard someone like the Lakers or the Dodgers, I always remember that, put it on the back of a business card, and then always remember to follow up. If the Dodgers or the Lakers won, I would follow up with a quick, message. I noticed the Lakers won. Did you watch the game yesterday? It was great to talk to you a few days ago. And my response rate, I failed so much. I kid you not, probably 99% of people didn't respond to me. But once I connected with people on a personal level, the response rate was much higher. So I would really encourage people to find ways to connect with people.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And even a very specific tip, I hope you all jot down your notes on specifically what are examples that you can do, right? The key thing that both have highlighted is already active listening, personalizing it, and really being intentional, which I know Jeannie has a ton to share about it. Jeannie, I want to jump in with you because I know you have a ton to share, because in that realms, when you coach and work with leaders and, especially in your mental wellness work as a therapist, is that it's to do that, self-awareness is a key part of the skill. And I would love to hear your thoughts in like what's something that you notice true leaders do very well that differentiates from others when it comes to self-awareness, connecting and building these relationships that you want to share.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Korean term I would say that comes to mind is nunchi. And I do love that word. And I will say, when I was growing up, I hated that word, mainly because Korean adults and ajumas would compliment me saying, I was given that term when I was young, which means I could read the room. I was always good at looking at the context. I feel like leaders should look at the context. So you're looking at the people. the room, the organization. It's not about you, right? I want to say you're the driver, and you can actually set the tone immediately. And a lot of my work, especially, and I do work in corporate, they are a huge part of my audience because I speak in corporate, and I have to immediately, even on a Zoom call, I will immediately kind of delve deep into my Nuchi, the skill that I have, the strength of connecting. I think that is the common theme here of connecting, even on an online call, of what I feel that I get from the energy of that space, if I'm making sense. So nothing needs to be said for me to understand what's going on. And I feel like that is a good thing about my own self-awareness over the years. I really believe you are already born with your skills, right? And I talked about this being solution focused. So you already have your own skills and resources. What I chose to do over the years was go right into that, delve deep into what I'm already good at and accentuate it. Not look at what I'm not good at. There's plenty I'm not good at. And if I focus there, then I'm just not going to get anywhere. But I'm like, you know what? I'm really good at this. I can connect. I can read the room. I can understand the context. I can connect with corporate leaders to college students. So I find myself being able to, I call myself a chameleon. And then parents, because I'm a parent. So that is how I feel like I've been able to address mental health effectively, because here's the thing. I don't want to be seen as an expert. You are really maneuvering the person. You're helping them navigate. That's the best word I can think of, to be able to help themselves with a little help. And I make that clear. Like, I love to discharge the person, if I'm making sense. So yeah, I would say good leaders have a great way of being introspective. That's where that comes to mind. And Nuchi. And I can say this with all these Korean people on the call, that we can use that, and you should be able to use that well. And it does take practice to use that.
Thank you, Jeannie, for sharing that. Introspective, as you already heard just from their bio, they were introspective. And when they were sharing about how they got into their whole career path and why they're doing what they're doing now, which, Jeannie, I'm so glad you brought it up, because the next thing I did wanted to ask is, to be honest, let's admit, all the spaces that you still maneuver were minorities. We're often one of the few. And I think when we did our prep call, we immediately resonated. It was like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm often the only one, or I'm trying to figure out how do we bring more diversity. And I'm sure that influences the way you hence problem solve, the way you continue to communicate and show up as an expert. So Stefan, if maybe I can start with you this time, we'll be curious, especially in the wealth world, I don't know if there's a lot of Korean American experts like yourself. Like, are there specific strategies that maybe, we won't ask for you to trade the secret, but any insights that you can share that encourage others who are trying to enter your field, what they can keep in mind as being Korean and Korean American in the field? What are things that helped you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one word I could think of is prepare, right? And to your point, in terms of people in my field, I mean, I'm on a panel with about 40 people in a few months. And I'm the only Asian person just out of entire group of 40 people, financial professionals, right? So there's definitely been some sort of a challenge, however you want to quantify or qualify that. But at the end of the day, once you prepare, and to provide my background a little bit more, I have a CPA working at Deloitte. I thought it was useless once I got to JP Morgan, because that's a financial world, so accounting and financial, right? Got my CFA there, which was a whole different animal. It's a chartered financial analyst, so CPA is accounting side, CFA is financial side. And little did I know my job right now would use both. So at the end of the day, if you prepare, you know what you're talking about, and you're articulate, and you're confident, I mean, it's really hard to argue against that. So at the core, if you're well prepared, I think you'll get through most things in life.
Thank you. Any specific way that helped you prepare that was different that you can share?
Could you repeat that one time with what?
What's a specific prepare strategy? Because I think, okay, we get the prepare, but like, can you share one additional specific tip that so they can jot down on action steps?
Well, yeah, specifically for my job, once I prepare on the technical side, right? Because one, you could do everything possible to understand exactly what's going on in the markets. I mean, right now, the toughest job is, I don't know if anyone follows the financial markets, but markets did this. It was the fastest fall ever in the history of the stock market of 20% or more. Then everyone was saying it's going to fall more and more and more. And then it did this. It was the shortest bear market ever, which means, again, 20% drop or more, but it recovered 20% or more in the history of the stock market, right? So once you prepare all those technical knowledge, then it comes, your interpersonal skills. So for every meeting that I have to understand, what is the client's view? Are they really, really technical in terms of the markets? Because if they do, and if they really want to focus on the job-specific numbers, I had a client yesterday. They were saying that the entire jobs market is a fraud. They said the jobs added number of 2.5 million in May was incorrect. So again, it was a very technical discussion. And I did my studies, and I knew that $2.5 million jobs added was not in dispute. It was actually the way unemployment rate was calculated, right? So I did the homework. The client actually apologized after the meeting, saying, I was actually wrong about that. It was a totally specific figure. And actually, that goes back to my whole thing about being prepared and then really understanding where the clients are coming from and their views. And if you're doing both sides, again, being technical and really understanding where the clients are coming from, those will be the most important things to prepare before a meeting in my field.
Thank you so much for sharing that, which really brings back to kind of the core functionality of we need to be experts and really know what we are diving into to be able to prepare and share. Thank you, Stefan. Tad, the question that I want to tie back to that is from your perspective, you already alluded to the importance of that relationship building and that connectiveness. And especially I feel like entertainment and sports right now, everyone is binge watching more shows and connecting, but there's also a lack of diversity in that realm. I'll be curious, if you're often in the room where maybe you are often one of the few Asians and Korean Americans speaking up, how does that influence in how you make sure you bring up that importance of diversity, and what skills has helped you?
Good question. So by the way, Victoria and Hannah, you're in trouble because you weren't paying attention and sent me a LinkedIn request while we were all talking. Gotcha, whoever you were. Anyway, so going back to the question, all my career, I've been kind of the diversity king. When I was at Time Warner Cable, I served on the diversity council for the company because we needed more diversity within the entertainment industry in terms of cable. I was like the first executive that was Asian or Korean, for that matter, to be at Time Warner Cable. And same thing with sports. I was a sports lover just like Steven. I'm shocked that I've never met Steven, even though he's a Dodgers fan, right? So next time, we're sitting in the wrong seats, buddy. Anyway, when you are kind of trailblazing on your own, you have to kind of set the examples, right? So what I've done over the last 10 years of my life is do that. I mean, I've taken everything I've ever learned in my entire career and I've used it in the sports entertainment industry. And for me, being the first Korean agent at Boras Corp per se, and to do what I wanted to do in sports, which was bring the first Korean from Korea to the United States in Hyunjin-Ryu. That was a big responsibility on my shoulders. So whatever I did was going to be reflective of what happens in the future for all the athletes. So as you guys have seen, after Ryu came over, 9 other players have come over without me having to be directly involved. And as a result of that, as I entered the next phase of my career and my own life, and I want to do basketball, I want to bring that first basketball player to the United States from Korea, same model. But that diversity thing that I'm the only one that's doing it, right? So now I'm going to enter the basketball universe, which is predominantly dominated by white Americans and African Americans. So I'm going to be the first Korean to kind of step in and say, hey, look, I'm going to bring a Korean player and I'm going to make this happen. So you're taking a big risk by doing that. But what's life without risk? So you take that as for what it is and, go full forward and don't look back. And that's what I've done all my career. It's worked for me so far and it'll work for you.
Thank you, Ted, for sharing that. I'm going to follow up on a quick question from Vivian, who asked, how do we deal with the frustration when most people, going back to the networking advice, don't respond when you reach out? What do you have to say on that?
Well, you're asking me, because I always respond. So Victoria and Hannah, don't worry. I'll accept your LinkedIn. And Casey, I accepted your LinkedIn right away, right? So I look at who it is first, at least. and you have to be of, like mind and quality. But I knew that I was going to do this. And Monica asked for our LinkedIn addresses, which I didn't give, by the way. So Casey, you were very resourceful in finding me and finding where I existed in the world of LinkedIn. Of those millions of people that are on LinkedIn, I don't know how you found me, but I do kind of a unique last name, Yo. So that's why, right? But when people don't respond to you, you have to be persistent. You just give up if somebody says no. So let's say, for example, there are men and women in this call, right? So if a guy or if a woman says no to you on a date, are you gonna just give up? No, you're gonna ask again. Come up with another creative strategy to do so. Maybe send some flowers. I don't know. Send some coffee. Who knows? You have to be creative in your approach, right? As Stephen said, find the like interest that person has and find that niche and try to get in that way. So obviously I'm involved in sports. So say something like, my nephew is like an incredible basketball player. He's like 6'7" and he plays for Davidson College. Okay, I'll reach out to you right away. Point being, just be creative. Be creative in your approach. Don't take the standard, I want to connect with you link. Send a message along with it. So
the
Casey,
personalization really makes a difference, right, Tad? I appreciate it. I want to make sure that we tie in because we have Jeannie and also Connie that I want to hear some insights. But thank you for modeling us and showing that. And the key things that I hope you're hearing is how you make sure you personalize those conversations. I mean, Jeannie, going back to what you were already sharing, this ties so beautifully to everything that you spoke about, where you're also one of the few when you go to your role as a therapist. Share me a little bit more, especially with that, but also lack of diversity in male and female in your world. And how do you then make sure you show that value and how are you problem solving?
Yes, that's why I'm trying to do my best to raise up the next generation. Trailblazer is a word I just describe myself because I think it fits in my field. I make it clear that I am a therapist, that I'm a therapist first, but I also do a lot of corporate speaking on mental health and wellness because I'm promoting a corporate culture of addressing mental health stigma. So that's a huge passion for me. So being Korean American woman, outspoken, and that is a strength I've had. Being a journalist, why I wanted to be a journalist, I was always a good speaker. So I use my voice to project more if I have to. And again, using my skills of having a presence. So I call it like you can create an executive presence no matter what age you're at. And so I tried to do that pretty young because of the strength I had of having a very loud voice. And I want to share, I forgot the question. I don't even know if I'm really talking about the question, but it is difficult. I want to share it is difficult being a trailblazer too, because I want to see more women who can, Asian American, Korean American women in my field. And I am faced with a lot of, and I'm not trying to, get to this angle here, but a lot of men leaders, and then they see me and they're like, oh, that's nice. But I'm trying to change corporate culture when I'm talking about mental health. So what I do is I think it was Tad, or I forget who said it, Stefan, about being persistent. I think that is also one of the qualities we need to utilize, is being diligent and persistent and to keep trying. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, you feel alone. I think I shared that with other leaders. Sometimes you feel alone. It's not easy. And I don't think anybody's really brought this up yet, but one of my core values, and I want to bring this up here, that has sustained me, and I want your core values to sustain you. Brene Brown says it really well. Identify 2 core values. Well, early on, I've identified mine. One I'll share today, which is my Christian faith. So that is what has sustained me. So I'm asking you guys to identify 2 core values that'll sustain you forever. And that is what you're going to use. That's going to thread throughout everything you use. And that has actually helped me navigate my own field and career. And even when I feel alone or when I'm leading something and trailblazing, I delve deep into my core values. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you, Jeannie, for sharing that, which again ties to the self-awareness piece that we spoke about. And, going back to, both Tad and Stefan's and everyone's advice, that if you do want to connect with people, you have to know where you are right now. Right? Well, who are you showing up as a person first? Like what value are you trying to provide and where are you hoping to go? Whether it's even reaching out to LinkedIn or building those relationships and mentioning that, hey, I know you like certain sports, like Stefan said, then it becomes more intentional. And Connie, I know that we have you here also live. The question I want to follow up with you is that I know in the nonprofit world, and especially with the work you do, you serve so many stakeholders. And I'm curious if you have any advice that you share and what actually helps you build those long-term relationships, but also serve your different stakeholders as a nonprofit leader, because there is a lot, both your board members, your actual community stakeholders, multiple generations. What's the secret sauce of how you navigate that, and wisdom that you can share for our community here?
Hi, everyone. Sorry for being late on this, but I think some of the things that I do are I really try to do a better job of listening and understanding that there are different perspectives out there and trying to learn from that. So, I'm a second generation Korean American. I was born here. And I always thought like first generation Koreans, that's my parents, right? Those are like the emos and the samchuns. And it was like sort of an us and them kind of a situation. And when I came into my work at KFAM, I was working very closely with a lot of first generation Korean Americans, as well as other second generations. And my comfort zone is in English and it's in the second generation community. But I learned very early on, I had to get out of my comfort zone. I had to be dealing with the first generation Korean Americans. Those are my primary individual donors. They're the historical folks who knew the agency the best. And there are a lot of our therapists and social workers who are working directly with our clients, as well as the clients themselves. So I had to be much more humble and be willing to listen to different points of views and perspectives. And I think that's important. I consider myself a progressive Korean American, and I have certain views around issues like women's rights, LGBTQ rights, immigrants' rights. But I also know that I work in a Korean American community, and we work with Korean churches around domestic violence, because we think if the churches and the moksanims and the salmonims understand domestic violence, they are often the gatekeepers for community members who don't want to talk about it with a therapist, but they will share those very personal things with their pastor. So I work with different constituents who don't necessarily share my views. And I've learned that it's important to be able to work across the aisle, that I don't get so stuck in my views that everyone has to agree with my views. What you really need to do is find common threads that people can find together. So, I worked as a lawyer, and I went to school in DC. I went to law school there, right next to the Supreme Court. And I still remember I would go to some of these arguments, and I heard Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia, who is a very conservative Catholic Supreme Court justice, unbelievably bright, very, very sharp. And he and Justice Ginsburg used to go head to head. I mean, they had diametrically opposed views, but they were also the best of friends. They would spend New Year's together, they traveled together, they saw the opera together. And I really respected that they could get beyond the different political opinions. And what they said was, we share a common passion for the Constitution. So I think it's really important to really figure out how to get beyond your comfort zone. You might have a certain identity you consider yourself and certain people you surround yourselves with, and that might make you comfortable. But when you go out into the work environment, you're going to have to learn how to go across the aisle and navigate different groups. And I just like to respond to something. When I was coming in, we were talking about what do you do if people don't respond when you're trying to network. I would like to just kind of add on top of what Tad said with persistence is get used to rejection. Get over it. You just move on, and you just go out there and you keep learning. There's that sports metaphor that I'm sure I'm going to butcher, Tad, but it's that you miss 100% of the shots you never take. And that is 100% true. A lot of my job is fundraising, which means I go up to donors and I ask them for money all the time. And in the beginning, when I got a no, I just felt defeated. And I thought, oh, I suck at this. And I probably did suck at it because I was new, but the only way you learn is you keep doing it. And I hear now a lot more yeses than I do nos, but I still hear nos. But if I didn't try, and if I just waited for people to come to me, I would get nothing done. So you need to not let yourself, crumble at the rejection. You just continue to persist and you move on. You get a no from someone, move on. There are plenty of people out there who will give you a yes. And the more you get rejected, the thicker your skin is and the more you learn from that. So just keep doing it.
Connie, thank you so much for sharing all those nuggets of wisdom and connecting the tie. It's funny because one of the things I shared even with the fellows recently, I shared a LinkedIn post where somebody talked about the same car value could be radically changed if you go to a different place because people appreciate it differently. And, you're absolutely right. I think all of you have shared the importance of working in different stakeholders, that it takes time. It's okay to navigate these different things. And so believe it or not, we're almost up to time. I know there's like so many other things that we can ask. I know, guys, you have to start asking questions. If you have questions, put it in the chat box. I saw the reaction, Angie, exactly how I feel too. But as I'm waiting for any other questions from the chat, I'll be curious to kind of check in with each one of you on some of the other advice that I would love to hear, which is on communication. So yes, it's one thing to, talk about all these things, but I would love if you can share one advice at a time, and I'm going to specify. So Stefan, from your point of view, financial literacy is so hard, I think, and it's unfortunately because in the education system we don't hear enough. As somebody who is informed in that, what's an advice that you share in how you can learn about the space, but also what you need to learn to communicate in that financial literacy aspect better? What advice do you have to share?
Absolutely, yeah. So financial literacy in general, I think we all connected before. One thing that I shared is within our education system, you're learning about algebra and calculus. I remember taking that. I don't know if it's like the AB or BC. It gets very technical, but somehow you don't know what a stock is. You don't know what a bond is. You don't know how to manage cash. Are you supposed to have 3 months worth of cash? Are you supposed to have 3 years worth of emergency cash? I mean, none of that is discussed. So going back to that, I think it's really important because, I had, pretty large debt coming out of college as well. And I always had to educate myself. Okay, I have this much of debt. This is my interest. So that's my interest expense per month. Going through just your personal finances and understanding the impact, because, at the end of the day, you could work really, really hard, but if you don't manage your own finances, you may never retire. And I'm sure most of you want to retire at some point. So, just really understanding, asking the right questions. Google is your best friend. I've never learned so much just off of Google, right? So I would just encourage everyone to really ask as much questions as possible. And one tip also wanted to give in terms of LinkedIn or just connecting out with people, the few times I've been also successful is with company email profiles. If it's, at jpmorgan.com, it's usually, you could tell if you find one person's email and you could guess what any other person's email is. So if it's, john.smith@jpmorgan, and if you know their name, you could guess what their email is. So that's actually another really good way to find them. But I've gotten responses that way. They've never messaged me back on LinkedIn, but they saw my email come through. Twice I reached them out, and I got an email response back. So just a really quick tip before we end there.
Thank you, Stefan, for sharing that and specific nuggets that we can absolutely implement. Jeannie, I want to tie back a question that I'm hearing from Angie-san, who made a great point about, it's one thing, for us to navigate this, but especially as Korean American in our duality in our career, it's like, through your work, you've helped build bridges and relationship across communities. Could you share a little bit more about your thoughts and how you do that, especially with now mental health?
Wow, yeah, that is a very loaded question. It'd probably take me a full hour to really answer that, because that is actually the core of why I went into what I do, because of my own experience with understanding mental health as part of my journey. But one of the greatest things I love doing is family therapy. And I believe me going into, this is technically my third career, but I seem young, right? No, so going into it later has given me, I want to say, the credibility based on my previous career experiences to help parents feel connected to their children. So I use a lot of understanding the Korean culture, the Korean American culture, first and second gen. All of that goes into my work. And that's why I talk about the core values a lot, because I bring up my own experience with having obviously the ethical and boundaries in place. But my most rewarding work is when I work with families and bridging the gap of communication Because the number one thing is there's cultural conflict, right? The parents are on one end, you as a second generation are another experience. And I think part of my job and why I'm training more people, and I want to see more Korean Americans and Asian Americans do this, is bridge the gap between first and second generation. Because guess what? It is still just as prevalent as when I was your age, which, oh, thanks, my earrings match. Yeah, see, I'm like squirrel, can't focus. And it's so prevalent, which baffles me that it's just, and depression and anxiety is on the rise. You guys know that, right? However, we have all the resources in the world, so many more resources than when I was growing up. But somehow still the family is the core of where I try to get at. Even when I'm talking in the corporate space, everything I share skills-wise, bring it back to your families is what I say in my messaging. So to answer your question, Angie, it's a huge part of my work. I have come to love being Korean. But as you've heard me share, it took years. And that might be part of our journeys too. So utilize it. And now I utilize it today. By the way, I grew up second generation Korean. So I relate to everything of your experience if you're having that experience, but I'm also a parent. So I can also relate to the first generation parents.
Thank you, Jeannie, for sharing that, and that how, identity truly plays a role, and we should not forget how that influences and how we show up, which, Tad, the question I have for you that I'm getting from Yulia is, how did you then overcome generalization and stereotypes your athletes faced while you were an agent for them, and how did you best advocate for them? We'd love to hear how you navigate that.
So I consider myself the 1.5 generation. So I have a combination of Korean and American values. And I'm more Korean than anything else. I speak good Korean. I didn't say great Korean, good Korean. Enough to be able to for me to communicate with my athletes and with their parents and people that surround this industry. So for me, what's worked really, really well is understanding my athletes, where they come from in terms of their families, their culture. Because I had to do not only Koreans, but I did Taiwanese players and Japanese players. And each one of us are a little bit different in that sense. So you have to really know who you're dealing with. And part of that is just kind of doing the right research and also getting familiar with the culture. I mean, you don't want to, for example, when you drink soju, when you guys get there, okay, older, okay, in Korean culture, you should always use two hands to pour, right? But in certain cultures, you don't. And you tap. In Chinese culture, you tap versus pour. So there's a lot of the little nuances that can make or break a deal for you. So you really need to do your homework and really, really do your research. Now, with respect to what everyone else was talking about, when Hyunjin Ryu was injured, I used to follow him around his minor league track, and I happened to be in San Jose, California, at a division at a 1A ballpark, kind of the minor leagues of baseball. And one of the things I saw on a sign, it said, if you don't do everything in your power to put yourself in the best possible position to have success, you don't have the right to be disappointed. It was on a wall in a gym, but it captured me enough that I wrote it down for myself. And I'm 48, so I gave up my age now. I'm 48, and I still live by this, because you have to have something to guide you in your life. And I understand it's very frustrating for you guys right now in terms of sitting at home and being quarantined and all this stuff during this pandemic. But even now, if you put your best foot forward, whether it be reaching out to people on LinkedIn or attending something like this, then you won't be disappointed, because you're carving your own pathway to success. And if you do that, you will not look back.
Thank you, Tad, for that wisdom and insight, right? The intentionality really makes a difference. And, this ties to another question that emerged from the Facebook Live crowd, talking about, how some of us are actually living in the Asian American communities and some of us are not. Connie, I would like to bring this question to you, where the question was, as an East Coast Korean American living in Boston, how have you all connected with other Korean Americans, tapped into that collective potential? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because you serve Korean Americans. Do you have some advice and perspective on that to share?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And it's actually something that I really wrestle with for the second generation or third generation Korean Americans where English is your dominant language, because it is harder. You know, KFAM, when we work with Korean immigrants, it's a little bit easier to tap into them because I know all the Korean language newspapers and radio stations and TV channels, and we just send a press release to all of them. We go on Miss USA. It takes care of itself because Koreans who don't speak English well are gravitating towards certain resources that can cater to their language at church, at media, and what have you. When you're working with second generation Korean Americans or third or non-Korean speaking Korean Americans, it's much more challenging because, you know, I get my news source from LA Times. I go on, you know, Facebook. I don't use Korean specific resource channels. So it is a very good question. How do you get your Korean news? How do you find that information? And I remember being kind of not really close with a lot of Korean Americans in college, and then and not in DC or Chicago where I was living, because there weren't that many Korean Americans there, to be honest. And when I came back to LA, I really did feel this need to reconnect to the Korean and Asian American community. And I was working at mainstream nonprofit organizations like the ACLU and a place called Housing Rights Center, and I wasn't getting that. I did try to reach out to the Korean community, but what I realized is that Korean Americans weren't necessarily comfortable asking for help from mainstream institutions. They were looking for something that felt culturally real to them. Whether you speak Korean or not, I think that is still true. And so I had to actively find ways to do that. So for me, what I did is I ended up going to a Korean American organization. And I have a lot of board members who are the same way. They're English dominant, but I always talk about it allows you to reconnect with the Korean roots and know Korean issues and meet with other Korean Americans by joining Korean professional groups, by being on the board of nonprofits, to do volunteer work at Asian or Korean nonprofits, you know, but there's, I'm sure, other social media outlets to do those kinds of things. And so I find that challenging as well. And so it's a very good question. And I don't know what exactly the answer is. Those are some of the things that I've seen work for some people.
Thank you, Connie, for sharing that and just alluding that, guys, there's no black and white answer to any of this. It's a continuing path and iteration. And I hope, you know, going back to the kind of description we all shared when we shared about our bio is just how the iteration continues to evolve. And then let me just do a check-in, like raise your hand if you like felt like I took down a lot of notes on things I want to be able to do. Can you raise your hand if you feel that way? Awesome, exactly. That's exactly how I feel. I know we're all raising our hands, and that's part of the beauty of it. And so as we wrap up, unfortunately, time has come up when we're having fun. We'd love to check in with our speakers on one final piece of advice, which is, what is one thing that you would recommend, action step that you recommend doing for our fellow Korean Americans, next generation, in one sentence? So just one statement from each person that we can hear. And we are going to walk away with those nuggets of wisdom. And so maybe I can start with Jeannie this time, Stefan, Connie, and Tad.
I actually wrote it in the chat box, but if I'm going to put it in one sentence, I would say put your oxygen mask on first. So meaning we're always trying to take care of everything else. Look at the, it's okay to look at the context and what's going on, but you need to see what's going on with you. So, I mean, take a deep breath, be intentional and purposeful, breathe in the oxygen so you can think. By the way, your brain needs oxygen to think. That's why there's deep breathing and anxiety, stress management. So that would be my piece of advice as we're, you know, delving into COVID and going forward. Yes, you need an adaptive mindset. So being willing to be uncomfortable and tolerate uncertainty.
Given that I'm a giant nerd, you could probably see two of my designations there. It's all a numbers game. I mean, I feel for a lot of the grads that are going through the current situation now. So, I mean, apply to as many jobs as you can, because at the end of the day, once you embrace failure and you go through a lot of failures, once you get the one role or one career you get, it's going to be that much sweeter. So it's a numbers game, embrace failure.
I would say for me, it's take risks and be open-minded. What leads to success for a lot of folks is not necessarily that they're just the smartest or most hardworking person in the room. It's that they've just continued to persevere and they've continued to try, and they didn't give up when the first thing didn't work out for them.
Dad? Sorry, you're on mute. We couldn't hear you. You can unmute yourself.
Unmute. So, best go last always. But, can you hear me now? Okay. Dream big and follow your dreams. Okay. And as Dr. Stephanie Hahn said last week, I believe, live a purpose-driven life. Okay. Because you won't regret it. Because if you do, you'll when you look back on your life 40 years from now or 20 years from now, you'll smile at the mirror and be happy.
And I'll also add, because I get to play the middle role. Also, don't go plan on doing this alone. There's a reason why there's community. There's a reason why we're social human beings. So bring your tribe with you. Find your 5 allies, maybe a part of your family, friends, mentors. Build that community with you so that you go and grow with it and have fun. This is a long-term journey, so it's a marathon. And so with that being said, thank you all very much for being here, fellows. I know we have more to catch up. Jeannie is out continuing her office hours, so please make sure you check out. But we hope you enjoyed it, and we're so glad you're here. And thank you again. Can we give a round of applause to our 4 panelists for sharing their wisdom and being part of it. So with that being said, we will see you again at our next program, which I believe will be in 2 weeks, where we'll have a special session. So stay tuned, check us out, and we will see you again. Thank you.